Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for the 11th of August, 2023. I am Aaron McHale, moderating the meeting today. Benji is unavailable. Joining us today, Ralph Kohler, Emma Horrell, and Thomas. And I'm just going to pass directly over to Ralph. He's got a few issues he's going to present, and he's sharing his screen. So yeah, take it away, Ralph.
Okay, the first issue is issue number 2546212, entity view form mode formatter widget settings have no translation UI. It's basically an issue I've commented on a few weeks ago, and Stephen Musgrave brought it up. It's currently needs review stage, was already set to RGBC in between, and yeah, to have a brief discussion and a second look would be a reasonable step, I think. Basically what that issue does is how to test, as it said, use core version applicable to patch, apply patch. Yeah, configure your article node with a Boolean field. I did that. Basically, I added to the article content type on the manage display page the bool field, and if you go to the edit, I set a custom, very creative string to true and false, and I've also activated multilingual, added German language alongside. Problem is, I'm on the 11.x branch, and there no real translations are available. But anyway, point is, if you go then to manage article, manage display, one second, one step back, on the configuration translation page, and the example listed there is, if you go to the content view display, default view mode default, go to translate and go before I edit the German translation, and if I go there, I added false for falsch and wahr for true. I have to note the one detail, it's in comment number 200. Yeah, there it is. Problem was in my comment, for one, I've noted, opening a view, on that manage display page, the order is true first and false second, and on a translation page, it's false first and true second. Jose Reyero, I guess that's his, if that's the correct pronunciation. If not, apologies. Stated it would be really hard to get the right order, because for me, if you switch on auto mode, autopilot, and you just click through, and I imagine it might be possible that you have memorized that true is in the first place and false is on the second, and you don't really scan read at all when you're on a translation page, and that way you might switch the labeling. Not very likely, but a possibility. And the other detail is, in previous revisions, when you accessed that edit the German translation page, then everything was collapsed, and you had to click first that one and then that one, and that was fixed meanwhile, and everything was expanded. there's also likelihood that there are a higher number of fields for a few of the entities to translate, and in that case the suggestion was to keep those then collapsed if a certain number of field sets are in place there. Yeah, but that's in basically the summary of that issue. Any questions or comments?
Well, obviously, that's the fact that those are effectively flipped around on the translation screen is not ideal. So I definitely think we can identify that as a problem. I will say it's convenient that you picked obviously you've used the German translations, and because I'm going to be in Germany later this year, and so now I know some German there. Although I'm not sure I will need to use true and false in day-to-day use, but always good to know. Yeah, any does anyone else have any comments or observations?
Simply, I agree. I'm curious what the problem is, like why they can't tell the ordering from the initial field, because I have to imagine what we're looking at is a pattern that's applied to this issue, but is this a bigger problem for the translation module overall? Like, are there other fields that are switching the order? And if not, why is this only affecting Boolean?
The explanation by Jose was about point number one. It would be really hard to get the right order here because we are somehow blindly translating properties that have a real form somewhere else, but we cannot use that one. So I'm not sure we can actually get that order information from anywhere.
But then that implies that this problem is not going to be unique to this situation. That implies that if they're blindly translating all of these fields, there are potentially or likely other fields that are also misordered. And they're probably just putting these alphabetical at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. It might be better.
Yeah, and it looks like, I mean, these are, I don't know too much about the inner workings of this. And it is unfortunate that Benji's not here because I believe he knows quite a bit about the translation system. But it does. I guess maybe do they default to, as you're saying, like alphabetically? And I wonder if because it's obvious like this is specifically for the Boolean formatter. So I'm wondering, yeah, for the Boolean formatter, is there a way they could say, overwrite that, or to make it go in the same order? That would be my observation.
So rather than using something systematic that's getting the information from elsewhere, just simply assuming that this is wrong and specifying when they do this, the ordering. Is that the suggestion?
I think, so one thing I'm trying to work out is, can you like flip what true and false mean? Because I saw you were on a screen where you said you could specify, false is correct, is true. Sorry, false is not correct, true is correct. Like
it's a label, so you can make the label say whatever you want.
Yeah,
I'm switching now on the
okay.
manage display page, update, and save. And let's reload this one.
Okay, so it's always, yeah, okay. So the sort of like capitals false and capitals true are always there consistently.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Manually altering the order isn't possible.
So like, again, just so I understand, is this the fundamental problem that the issue is trying to look at? Like, is for these cases the ordering of is not consistent?
No, the fundamental problem that issue was created for is actually adding a translation UI.
Oh, okay.
One at all. Before the patch, you were unable to translate those at all.
Okay, so those like custom values that you provide for true or false couldn't be translated.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. And that's okay. It's just the fact that this is this a new interface that you were showing? The
That is the sentence. There are several pieces of information from the entity field system which may include translatable strings, but which prior to this patch are not translatable using the config translation UI. That is the main objective.
Right. Yeah. So and the true and false is an example of that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was asking the question, because you can't just override that. This isn't specific to just true and false. This issue is addressing the greater missing piece of the translation UI, and the Boolean is an example of a formatter that needs to happen for, but this is for other formatters as well.
Yeah. But from the top of my head, I'm unable to find a good other example. So maybe I'm not a developer, so I'm not sure, but would it
What
make
about
sense?
a list field type? Because I'm assuming that for a list field type, you'd do something very similar. You'd have 2 or more values possible. Do you have to add it perhaps before it throws it into that other form? So you'd have to add a field. Yeah, create a new field. Yeah.
List text.
Yeah. But even number values, because I think you can label them, but I could be wrong. I have not seen this. I have not used the newer form.
I've added that one as well to the list, to the short list of things to discuss. Save settings field, save. Lister, edit, oops. Default. Reload. Question is, where is it? Maybe it's key. No, nothing appears there.
It should. I would point that out as a major bug if it's not, that part isn't working.
Listen, edit. Field setting, 1, 2. Basically, it should appear in here, shouldn't it?
Mhm.
Or would it be named differently?
Is it maybe, is there like a object for the content type, and then you go into the
Content fields, maybe? Ah, there.
oh yeah, okay.
Translate. Ah, yeah, there it is. Let's add.
Okay. So you get one for each. Okay. But are they, I guess, are they in the same order?
They are in the same order. They're getting ordinality.
Yeah,
1, 2,
okay.
One second, I try something. Manage fields, the lister, edit, field settings. That's 2 in position 1.
drag and drop
X1.
them. I leave them as 1, 2, 3, but drag and drop 1 to become 2.
Oh, it's that way, yeah. Oh, that way. True. Save.
Yeah,
That
so it is
order
getting
is
the
picked
order.
up.
Yeah, so I think we can say that there's a precedent there for saying that, you know, the order should be consistent. Like if you use the list as an example, like that's where the order is consistent between when you configure those values and when you are providing those translations. And if we say, you know, from a user, if let's say from a usability perspective, our recommendation is that the field on the translation screen, it should always be consistent with how it's presented on the in where you configured that. The order should be consistent. Then I think we can make that recommendation, and we don't necessarily have to in this meeting worry about kind of like how that would be implemented.
Yeah, agreed.
The order should be consistent between the. Could you repeat again? Because
yeah,
I'm making notes.
Like how on an example of a list, the items you've added here, you've specified the order, and then when you go to translate, you get them in the same order. So the ordering is consistent. But with the Boolean example, the ordering of the true and false is not consistent, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we need to say that that you know, we've identified that as an issue, and the recommendation is that the ordering the order should be consistent between where you configure the non-translated versions and where you configure the translated versions. So in other words, going back to the Boolean example, if true is first and then false is second on the fields UI, then that should also be the case in the translation interface. And you know, there might be some rework that's needed to make that possible, but I think that's really important.
But I wonder, would it make sense to move the ordering aspect to a follow-up issue? Because if it's really that complicated and problematic, it might hold that issue back for at least one minor version, I suspect, if not longer.
Yeah, I think, from my personal view is that, sorry, there's like a spider on my desk and it's distracting me. Yeah, my view is that like I wouldn't make it. I mean, I'm comfortable with that being like if it's too challenging, then let's make it a follow-up issue. I don't know how do others feel about what.
I think it's worth, yeah, considering, because it could be you change that and then that has a knock-on effect. Like I think it does it might warrant further investigation, and if it doesn't, then it would be just a separate issue that's closed off. But
Mm-hmm.
it seems sensible to me.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're saying that this is we make this a recommendation for this issue, but we would encourage if it's too challenging, we would encourage it to be done in a follow-up issue then.
And just for our own consideration, it may be too challenging if the list works because the list has some ordinality coming across that field includes, which is allowing it to order. But my concern continues to be that if we're seeing two disparate behaviors, to me that means that this, just because we found the problem in Boolean, we were lucky. It could be happening anywhere else, or more specifically, it could have impacts for any custom widgets that are being created out there.
Right.
And so we have to develop some consistent pattern that whatever this solution does is then dictating for the correct creation of widgets in the future and updating of existing custom, or not custom, but any widgets that are either in contrib or custom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's quite important, I think, that there's consistency there. I'm wondering actually, another example we could look at, and I'm mindful we probably want to we probably want to move on to another issue soon, but I just wonder how link behaves. So because a link field has like a text and URL, and I'm wondering what happens in that case with if you want to translate a link field like that. Because I think on the view, I think you can configure like, maybe you can't configure it, but
you also had the ability there to do more than one link. You could have done 2 or 3, and that would also have an order.
Right. I think the obviously the link value itself is configured on the individual entities, but I'm wondering, like, I think you can, if you go to like the form display, can you change the like what shows up as the labels for like URL and text?
One sec.
But there's also an order to.
Oh, maybe not. Okay.
Those are the options. Content fields again. Link. German.
Okay. So we get, in that case, can see label, help text, and then we get so we get the default value as well. Okay.
Yeah. So the link. Yeah, we get the default link text, not the URL. So,
yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. You probably wouldn't want to.
Oh, why? For example, if you have the English version and you could link to the German version.
Actually, yeah, that's a really good point.
And
but then I wonder if that's more content translation rather than config translation. Because this is more like about the individual, like you would configure the link values on.
Yeah, the URL might be content and the link text config.
Yeah, I suppose you could. Maybe that's a follow-up issue to be able to configure the default value, make the default link URL translatable, because that could be something, as you said, you might want to do. There might be translatable versions.
And I'm still curious if you have more than one link.
Oh, one. I've limited the field. Let's set it to 2, maybe.
That's Lister. So.
Oh. Thanks. Yeah, 2.
So in this instance, you could have one link called English and one link called German, but the label could be written in English and the label could be written in German. So it gives you 4 different versions of 2 links.
Yeah.
But 1 second. Take a look at the link. I've set in the field settings limited to 2. Here, default value for Drupal. I haven't entered anything.
Yep. So if you enter in like the German Drupal.org URL, but you call the link text the German, so the link text itself would be written in English for each of these URLs.
Shout out to our friends in the Drupal German Association.
So it's getting order here too, as well.
What I find interesting is that the order for these cases, we have these. We've got these kind of like each one is a expandable field set. I wonder how that would, if we would see the same behavior with that we saw with Boolean if the URL was also translatable, because that would also in the case of like the Boolean one, you had 2 translatable values in one of these like expandable areas, whereas in this case you only have 1, and the ordering is obviously coming into play when there's like multiple of these field sets. So I think it's slightly different because, and we probably would, again, I don't know if we'd be able to replicate that with Boolean, because we were configuring the true false on the form display settings, which I don't think, I think is disconnected from the number of like possible values.
I'm just thinking that if you look at the database, there's some ordinal value that is associated with that list, and that this form somehow is not reflecting what's in the database, so that when it's pulling it from the database, it's getting a different order maybe, or the information's missing and it's defaulting to alphabetical. It's hard to tell because it is only 2 values, but there's something that makes Boolean different. And my concern continues to be like, we don't know why we're seeing this pattern mismatch. And so that's what has to be resolved. It may not be fixable within this issue, but we shouldn't proceed with this issue without the pattern being established of how widgets should be built so that the translation can work correctly. Because otherwise you could run into this problem repeatedly and we can't predict it right now.
Right. So if we were to try and sum up the discussion here, we've agreed that the having consistency in terms of the order of fields between the field UI and the translation interface is important. And that's something which we should strive for, but maybe in a follow-up issue. And that we've identified a separate issue, but is worth maybe opening an issue for, in that you can't translate provide a translation for the URL on a link field. Is there anything we're missing there, or those are kind of two key things we've identified?
The only detail I'm okayish with the current state, but still suboptimal. If you take a look again, swiping doesn't work. Content view display. If you look here and go to the default and edit, everything is expanded. But on the examples we've created now, where was it again? Content type. That was the.
I think you need to go to the content fields.
Oh, yeah. The wrong one, yeah. Oh, 1 second. It's still something different because we're in here in the content types, but the other thing, the content view display for default is a completely different context also. That is in the context of the view mode in here.
Yeah.
But the other thing is on the field level, the translation. So
and there's also the form display translations. And actually, could you go back into the Boolean one? Because on the view display,
in
so if you go
content
back
type
into
or
wherever you were,
content view display, default,
right?
edit.
Okay, now, oh no, sorry, because we flipped the labels. I thought true was first, but it's because it's still false is first. It's because we flipped the labels, right? Okay, yeah. But I that's a potentially a third thing, as you said, like the do we think these should always be expanded by default? Is that something
that was
we should
my suggestion? And they also did it, but I think the expanding issue I had is not applicable to the content fields part. That's a completely different context. If you go here, oh, but here is it's expand. Confusing.
There might be something that's like if there's more than one thing.
That is what Jose suggested to 200. The form being always small is not a term we can use, though, as there may be many more fields or properties here. It will just depend on each content type configuration. Each field has its own story. I try some count nested fields. Do not collapse. That one here.
I think, though, in talking about the Boolean and the last example, that's a good example. That is, we've put in true, false, but I've been in a lot of instances where people have changed the text multiple times, and it might say something like, you accept this form, you don't accept this form. I think we've talked about in past meetings where there's like contractual stuff with Booleans, and the fact that they are misordered, that slight difference in UI could lead to mislabeling very, very easily because it's not consistent. It's just easy to see when like falsch und wahr and true and false look so different from one another, but with sentences that are very similar, I think that is a risk. And it's why this isn't a trivial problem that can be ignored. I think it's just a question of whether or not it can be solved within the constraints of this issue.
Right, and that's a really important point, that it would be quite easy for somebody to potentially mislabel those, and that could have real world consequences, right? Particularly if you're not checking the translations regularly.
And just
if
by
the
the
person,
sorry.
just gonna say, the person doing the translations may not be the person who created the field.
Correct.
Okay, Ralph, do you have enough to sort of comment or provide a summary on this issue? Is there anything more we need to talk about in relation to this one?
I don't think so. I write up a summary and I post it on the UX channel first for that you take another look, because with all those terms with displays and view modes and so forth, I'm a bit afraid I might mix things up and it might be a bit misleading.
Sure,
So,
we can all have a look.
Okay, thank you. And I might have another similar issue we could quickly tackle, which is also in regards of consistency between two different pages.
Okay.
It's an issue I've created a while ago. It's issue number 334448. It's the context of the field UI module. Improve the manage form display page by untwining field widgets that belong to the main content and the sidebar. That issue is basically easily summed up with the following screenshot comparison. On the left side, you have a node creation or edit page. I will create an article in that case. And on the other hand, you have the manage form display page. And if you compare, you have the title, the image, the body, tags, and then on the other hand, in the sidebar, you have revision log message, provide a menu link, open and close, the comment settings, URL aliases, authoring information, and promotion options. But if you take a look on the manage form display, a user new to Drupal might be under the impression it's possible to alter the order of all those available fields here. And you have title, image, then body, text, tag. Then comes authored by, which is up here. Then authored on, which is authored by is here, authored on down here, then promoted to the front page is down here, sticky at top down here, then comments is up here, URL aliases, and then published over here. So it's on one hand completely mixed up, and second of all, you have no way what is an actual front-facing field for the user and which is metadata in the sidebar. And you also think it would be possible to hide certain sections in the sidebar, which is also not really possible. I've created tables with node edit pages and a manage form display pages next to each other. And also, if you add 2 more extra fields, the order is again mixed up even more. And similar with the basic pages. And my suggestion was the following. I would suggest to add two secondary navigational tabs called something like main or content, and one called sidebar to manage to the manage form display page of content types. The main tab should have an enabled and a disabled section, so you're able to enable and disable field widgets for the main form, and the order is directly reflected on the node edit form. The sidebar tab is a bit more tricky. Intuitively, it isn't clear that you're currently unable to alter the position of detail elements the field widgets are contained in. I haven't come to a conclusion what might work. Either keep a sort of fixed order and only allow disabling field widgets, or the other way around, find a way to also let the site builders adjust the order in the sidebar. At this point, I'm still not sure about the best solution. Add a field widget for the provide a menu link checkbox, so it would be possible to disable it and consistent with the rest of the sidebar elements. Those are the points.
Yeah, so that's yeah, it's a really well thought through issue there, and I can definitely see and appreciate the problem that you've highlighted there. Interestingly, there's an experimental module in core that expands, I think it's called field layout. And there's been a lot of talk of whether to move that module, just to integrate it into the field UI, because it essentially builds on what was built for Layout Builder, the kind of layout discovery work. And it would allow you to have represent these kind of layouts in the for the form display. Like so in theory you could have like a sidebar region on that manage form display tab. And so that might be one, if that does come in, that might be one route to doing what you were suggesting. But if not, as you said, the other route could be adding like I guess a form display mode, specifically for that sidebar region.
1 second, I get into the article.
And I think the other challenge is like part of that layout is done in the Claro theme, and so is like I think is like outside of the control of the field UI, and part of it is the fact that those appear in those kind of like forget what we call them, like the tabs. Normally they're vertical tabs, but again the theme is kind of turning them into this like sidebar region. And so there's some complexities there in terms of like how the theme interacts with the node module and the field UI.
Do we repeat? My connection is unstable and the last sentence got hacked more or less.
Sure. Yeah, basically saying that like there's the way that layout is produced is kind of based on not just the node module, because it uses the it's using like vertical tabs, and then the theme Claro is taking it and like presenting it as a sidebar. So there's a few things at work there, and obviously there's no way for you to like control that through the field UI as you've pointed out.
Okay. Oh.
But I agree that it's not ideal because then you have, as you said, there's no way for you to like know why certain fields are showing up in the sidebar or not, and how you might add fields to the sidebar, or and you
okay,
can't even
just
control those groupings either.
yeah, the groupings wouldn't be that much of a problem, in my humble opinion. But my main gripe is just it's a melting pot of actual form fields and sidebar fields, and you can't distinguish in between. You have to know title, body, text. Okay, which is which?
Yeah.
I think related to this issue, and I think the two of you may have already touched on it, is the fact that historically I might build a view that I wanted to add as a field here, because it would contain some sort of dynamic metadata. So let's say I wanted to tell the author this is the 198th article they're writing, because we have something that changes each time they create new content. It tells them what value it is, and then it saves it with that information for them. And so we want to add that to the sidebar area, some sort of additional fields, and this form does not make it apparent at all that you can't do that. That one thing is fixed, and if you added that additional field, it can only be added to the list of fields along the main content area, not the sidebar. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I think this fundamentally the problem isn't unique to Node or content, because if you go and say, for instance, if you go to add a media item, perhaps, or a taxonomy, whatever you've got, yeah, okay, media. You'll see this is, so those tabs down there are exactly this. It's exactly the same essentially as Node. And you also would not be able to add things to those vertical tabs through the field form display. So you get it's also not it's not unique necessarily as a problem to the Node module.
Manage form. That's the image, yeah.
So you'll see you have those additional, URL alias, the authored ones, but they don't, they appear in those tabs, and there'll be no way for you to, like, as you say, manipulate those tabs or add anything else, or add any tabs of your own, for instance.
Yeah, but in the first place, already the context is not possible to distinguish what is content and what is the metadata in a sidebar. That's the main problem, and it applies to all the entities, the media, as well as, for example, one thing we've already touched a while ago, the managed form display. That's even worse. There you have the username and password block, let's call it, with 3 or 4 form elements in it, and it applies to several occasions.
And while we're here as well, like, if you click on the Manage Fields tab for user,
manage fields,
you'll notice there's, like, the only field there is picture. So, I mean, which in a way I think this is kind of related, but the fact that for fields you add here, there's a correlation between, okay, they show up under manage fields, manage short display, and manage display. But you've got these other fields that, as a site builder, if you don't understand the code base and you don't understand where these fields come from, you'll think, why does username and password only appear on the form display? Why does that not appear in the managed fields? Again, this is like a slightly different problem, but it's kind of on a similar theme.
But I think if you let's hide that one, save, and reload. As you can see, it entails much more. For comparison, save, and I load it again and compare it. As you can see, it's current password, email address, username, password, status, and roles, and contact settings. No, and roles. That's it.
Yeah.
Contact setting not.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot that we could be doing to improve the user experience. The fact that like we don't have a dedicated form for changing the password is something we've looked at in the past, and how the current password field can be really confusing.
There's another issue.
Yeah.
It's also on the short list about that.
And there was an issue we looked at not long ago where which is still in sort of ongoing discussions around the messaging that appears when you reset the password, and how the user edit form is just not suited for it. But I think we're kind of getting slightly off track here. So I'm aware we're actually running close to the hour. So I don't have a for the issue you're talking about specifically. I don't I'm trying to think of like what could be a good next step that we could say here, and nothing like is immediately coming to mind as to what would be the best way to progress. I think you were saying, Ralph, about maybe some distinguishing factor between what fields you can move and change and what ones you can't.
Yeah. Basically, the easiest short win would be where is it? No, that's not the one. That's the wrong one. Go on in here, manage display to basically, I don't know, in here, add a secondary tab in here with one called, what was my suggestion? Main or content, and the other called sidebar or metadata. And that way you could sort it, move title, body, tags to the main tab and the others to the sidebar. And on the main tab, you could have those handles to change the order. And on the sidebar, for the moment, it could be fixed, that it's communicated indirectly that it's more or less the sidebar for the moment. And in a follow-up, you could start to add, for example, the suggestion Thomas had, to add the ability to add a view with a number of articles that also an author wrote to the sidebar or other things, though it could become more flexible and you are able to change the order and so forth. But the most basic change for me would be adding a secondary tab here, distinguishing between content and metadata, aka sidebar.
Yeah, so that is a question I have. Is the metadata defined naturally as part of how things are structurally built, or is it tied to how Claro is representing those fields? I'm assuming it is independent of Claro. So if we added a different theme, you will continue to have those particular fields separated out, but whatever it is that distinguishes those fields, I'm not sure how that metadata about the metadata is being managed. Like, how is it identified that it is different? And the reason this matters for the short or quick fix is that my concern is we're talking about adding a tab, but we need to make certain that tab is the same for all themes. And I just can't confirm that I know that to be true.
It's the Claro is basically restyling the vertical tabs, and it's actually the entity form code for each entity type is basically it's done in code. It's like in the form array. It sets up the vertical tab group, and the developer basically decides what goes in there. Yeah, and I'm wondering actually if maybe an additional tab, because the tabs are usually used to represent the separate form displays, which are configuration. And I'm wondering actually if a better way it would be to have an additional grouping on here. So like if you scroll down, Ralph, there's disabled is technically a grouping. If we just had an additional grouping, because that's not tied to configuration, for those, like metadata fields. But I'm also aware that we are at the hour, and we could obviously keep discussing it. I'm wondering if we should maybe move the conversation to Slack, or on the issue, or even bring it up at a future meeting again. I think because I think we could probably keep discussing this.
I'm open to anything, because the current situation in that context of managed form display is challenging for me, and one of my biggest gripes. So I'm all open to anything. Just one brief comment to your suggestion with a third category in here. I thought about that in the first place, but I considered it problematic if you have one section with, for example, the actual content items, title, body, and so forth, which are movable, and then you have a section with non-movable items. And if that might be too confusing for the user, meaning it's two different contexts are overlapping here, and with those three sections. And I wondered if that would cause too much stepping stones.
I mean, if I were to consider the how of it in that situation, I would remove the little hatch marks to the left that indicated they could be dragged and dropped in that section. And I would add a value that was visible as a column that stated that like these things were immobile and or default. So like things that had to be there that we know were fixed would always show down in that area. They wouldn't be drag and droppable, and they would have something that would say like something that indicated they were permanently part of that section. And then anything else that you could add down there or switch to being down there, you would be able to change it through a gear to the right. And that's a how, and I know we're not supposed to be talking, but I could envision something that would work this way, and it would differentiate visually and in metadata about the metadata, why that was true. I'm just concerned about putting them to separate tabs. You eliminate the ability to move body into the sidebar if you potentially wanted to be able to do that. Like, it's drastically changing the pattern for the same form. It's splitting the form into two forms. And then the question becomes, what happens if a theme is created that has three forms? Because it comes up with some sort of footer, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that multiple tabs is not an ideal solution. And something like, I'd rather have two tables on this page, or two sets, like multiple regions like Aaron described on this page, because at least it's all the same form still.
Yeah, I think if what we'll do is let's keep the conversation going. I think I do want to end the meeting now so that people can get away, but let's definitely keep it going, maybe over Slack, and yeah. So thanks everybody for coming in the conversation, and yeah, we'll be here next week. And yeah, I mean, yeah, let's keep going. Let's keep chatting on Slack because I think this is worthwhile, especially what you were just saying there, Thomas. Is a good point. So
I agree.
okay,
Thank you.
Thank you,
all right,
guys.
thanks everyone.
Bye.
Nice
Take care.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye bye.